She didn't even feel herself hit the floor. 1 second, she was standing in the kitchen, her triplets arguing over who got the last glass of juice. The next, the world went black. "Mama?" 3 small voices, panic rising. One of them grabbed her phone, locked. Another ran to the drawer, the one she had forbidden them to open. Inside was a second phone, old, cold, dead for 5 years. They didn't know whose it was. They only knew it was the only name saved. TJ Jun. The man she had erased from her life, and the only man powerful enough to save it. The phone had been dead for 5 years, not powered off, not lost, dead the way only TJ Jun knew how to kill something, deliberately, completely, without a funeral. He had kept it anyway. That was the part he never explained to anyone, not his executive team, not the 3 lawyers who managed his personal holdings, not the woman who had spent 18 months trying to become indispensable to him. He kept the phone because some part of him, the part buried beneath the empire, beneath the reputation, beneath the name that made grown men on 3 continents choose their words carefully, some part of him had never believed she was truly gone. Regina didn't disappear, she decided. And that was a different thing entirely. It was 3:07 a.m. in Seoul when the phone moved. Not rang, moved. A single, silent vibration against the velvet lining of the drawer, so faint that a lesser man would have missed it. TJ Jun was not a lesser man. He had trained himself to notice the things the world tried to hide from him. That was how he had built everything he had. That was how he had survived everything he had lost. He looked at the drawer for a long moment without opening it. The city of Seoul burned gold and silver beyond his office window, indifferent, electric, eternal. In 11 hours, he was supposed to finalize the acquisition that would make Jun Global the largest private media conglomerate in East Asia. In 11 hours, 200 people were depending on him to be the man he had carefully constructed himself to be. The drawer vibrated again. He opened it. The caller ID was a single letter. RTJ picked up the phone. He did not speak. That was the protocol, a protocol he had built himself for a line he had designated for only one person in the world. Yet if it was her, she would know the silence. She had helped design it. What came through the line was not her voice. It was breathing, fast, uneven, wet, the breathing of someone who had been crying for a long time, not screaming, not panicking, just crying, the low, exhausted kind that happens after fear has already done its worst, and all that is left is the aftermath. Then a voice, small, deliberate, the voice of someone who had been coached to be brave and was doing their absolute best. A man on the phone? TJ's hand tightened on the receiver. Is this man on the phone? Mommy said you would answer. The air in the room did something strange. It didn't leave TJ's lungs so much as it simply stopped moving, like the city outside had held its breath at the same moment he did. He said, "Who is this?" A pause, then muffled, the small voice repeating something to someone else in the room. A whispered conference, 2 voices, maybe 3. And then the sound of something being shuffled. What passed, shared, a different voice came on the line, slightly lower, more cautious. She said, "Don't hang up." She said, "If you hang up, we're supposed to call again." "Where is she?" TJ said. "Where is Regina?" Silence. Then, with the devastating simplicity that only a 3-year-old can produce, "Mommy is on the floor. She's not playing. We tried to wake her up, but she won't do it right." TJ stood. His chair moved back across marble. His hand was already reaching for his secondary phone before the thought fully formed. Because he knew, with the bone-deep certainty of a man who had spent his entire life reading situations before they became crises, that whatever had happened in the last 5 years, whatever Regina had done, whatever she had built, whatever she had decided he was not allowed to know, she had kept this number. She had taught her children to use it. And she had done both of those things for a reason she had hoped would never become necessary. "How many of you are there?" he asked. Quiet, steady. The voice he used when the danger was real enough that panic would cost lives. Another conference, more whispers. 3, the first voice said. Then, as if this was the most important piece of information, "We match." Something moved through TJ Jun's chest that he did not have a name for. And he had spent a great deal of his life naming things precisely, Assets, liabilities, variables, risks. He was very good at it. He was not good at this. This feeling that started in his sternum and spread outward like a fault line, recognizing itself. 3. We match. He thought of her face, Regina, the way she looked the last morning he ever saw her, calm in a way that had not made sense to him until much later, once she was already gone and the calm revealed itself in retrospect. It is the particular stillness of a woman who has already made a decision and made her peace with it. He thought of everything she had not said, everything he had not asked. He made 4 calls in the next 7 minutes. Each one was answered before the second ring. Each one was given instructions in a voice so level that the men on the other end moved without question, without delay, without anything resembling hesitation. Then he returned to the first phone. The children were still there. He could hear them, the soft, rhythmic sound of 3 small bodies pressed together, waiting the way children wait when they have been told that waiting is the bravest thing they can do. "I need you to stay exactly where you are," he said. "Okay. Don't open the door for anyone. Even if they say Mommy sent them?" He paused at that. Because that question, that specific question, was not a question a 3-year-old invents on their own. That was a question that had been planted, rehearsed, built into them the way survival is built into things that know they are being hunted. "Even then," he said. "Okay, man on the phone." He was already moving toward the elevator. He didn't run. TJ Jun had not run toward anything in 15 years. But what he did in the following 4 hours would register across 3 intelligence networks as an anomaly, a deviation from a behavioral pattern so consistent that several people paid a great deal of money to track it. The man who moved in silence made noise that night. The man who never deviated. And somewhere, in the quiet frost of Syracuse, New York, in a small house full of color and warmth that had gone cold, 3 children sat in a circle around their mother and waited for a man they had never met, a man their mother had described to them in the careful, neutral language of someone trying to prepare children for a truth without letting them feel the weight of it, and they held each other the way she had taught them to hold each other. Like they were enough. Like 3 was a whole number. What TJ Jun didn't know, what he could not have known at 3:07 a.m. in Seoul, watching the city lights smear past the window of a car moving through streets that were beginning to wake, was that the phone call was only the beginning. That Regina's collapse was not the crisis. The crisis was everything underneath it. The secret she had built an entire life to protect. The truth she had buried in a city 5,000 miles from the man who would have changed everything if he had known. She hadn't erased him because she stopped loving him. She had erased him because someone wanted her to, and that someone was still watching. The private jet touched down at Hancock Airport at 6:44 a.m. Was in the city of Syracuse, received TJ Jun, the way it received everything that winter, without ceremony, wrapped in gray, indifferent to the weight of what had just arrived inside it. He had not slept. He had not eaten. He had sat in a leather chair at 40,000 feet and done the one thing his entire life had been engineered to prevent him from doing. He had felt something he could not calculate. 3 children, 3 voices, 1 number, we match. His security lead, Park, Dietz, had spent the 4-hour flight briefing him on everything they had been able to pull on Regina James in the last 3 hours. The name she was using now, the neighborhood. The house, small, brightly painted, the kind of intentional cheerfulness that TJ recognized immediately as armor. The community work. The nickname everyone in her zip code apparently used for her without irony. Ms. Positivity. TJ had read the dossier twice and felt something tighten in the back of his jaw both times. Not because the life she had built was small, because it wasn't. Because she had taken nothing. She had left Seoul with nothing. He knew that now, had confirmed it, and she had built something. Without him. Without the Jun name. Without a single thread of the world he had assumed she would eventually need. She had not needed him at all, and she had still kept the phone. That contradiction was the thing he could not stop turning over. That was the loose thread his mind kept pulling. Because TJ Jun did not believe in sentiment. He believed in strategy. And the phone, the kept, hidden, never activated phone, was not sentiment. It was architecture. She had built a door into her disappearance, and she had left him the only key, and she had done it so quietly that even he hadn't known the door existed until it opened itself. What did she know that she hadn't told him? What had she been afraid of? The car stopped in front of a house painted the color of a sunflower. A bright yellow, defiant almost, the kind of color that announces itself against winter like a declaration. A low wooden fence. Window boxes, empty now but clearly tended. A hand-painted wooden sign near the door that read, "Positivity lives here in looping confident script." TJ looked at that sign for exactly 2 seconds. Then he got out of the car. Park moved ahead of him, but TJ put one hand out, a single, quiet gesture, and Park stopped. TJ walked to the door alone. He knocked, not loud, not demanding. 3 measured strikes, the kind of knock that says, "I know you can hear me and I'm choosing to wait." Nothing. He tried the handle, unlocked. He pushed the door open. The smell hit him first. Shea butter and something warm, vanilla maybe, threaded through with the cold that had crept in from somewhere. And beneath both of those, something else. Something chemical and faint, like a word spoken in a language you almost recognize. His body registered it before his mind named it, and the name, when it came, made him very still. Digitalis. Pharmaceutical grade. Barely there, but there. In the living room on the floor beside the couch, Regina lay unconscious. Dark brown skin gone ashen at the edges. Her natural hair was spread around her head, a crown of coils, intricate and full, like her body had arranged itself into something beautiful even in its undoing. She was wearing a blue dress, the color of a deep sky, and her hands were open at her sides, palms up, the way people sleep when they have nothing left to hold. She was breathing, shallow but breathing. And pressed around her, still in their matching dark red pajamas, still holding the phone between 2 sets of small hands, were 3 children. They looked up at him at the same time. TJ Jun, who had faced boardrooms full of men who wanted to dismantle everything his family had built. He who had negotiated in rooms where the silence was a weapon. TJ Jun at this moment did not know what to do with his hands. The tallest one, a boy, watchful, with eyes that assessed him the way a much older person assesses a stranger, spoke first. "Are you man on the phone?" "Yes," TJ said. The boy looked at him for a long moment, looked at him the way TJ himself looked at contracts, searching for the clause that would cost him something. "You don't look like a monster," the boy finally said. "Mommy said you were the only one big enough to scare the other monsters." The sentence landed like a hand pressed flat against a wound. She had told them about him. Not warmly, not tenderly, but she had told them. She had built him into their survival vocabulary. She had handed them his number and his name and the context they would need to use both, and she had done it with the calm, as devastating precision of a woman who understood that she was the only line of defense between her children and something she could not fully name to them, but she had named it to herself. He crouched down to their level. It was not a natural posture for him. His body was built for towers, for height, for the particular advantage of being the tallest person in any room. On his haunches, eye to eye with 3 3-year-olds in red pajamas, TJ Jun felt something crack open in his chest cavity and let the cold air in. "What are your names?" he asked. "Leo," said the watchful one. "Leah," said the second, a girl with a jaw like a small fist, squared and certain, who was looking at him not with fear but with an evaluation that made him feel, somehow, seen. "Luna," said the third, the quietest, the one who had stayed closest to Regina's shoulder, whose eyes were enormous and dark and full of a knowledge that sat far too heavy for a face that small. 3. They matched. They were looking at him with 3 different versions of a face he had seen every morning in the mirror for 34 years. TJ did not allow himself to feel it fully. Not yet. There was work to do first. There was always work to do first. Feel it later, handle it now. He called Park in. He called the private medical team that had followed in the second vehicle. Fardy watched them move around Regina's still body with professional efficiency, checking her vitals, drawing blood, documenting, and he stood at the edge of the room with his arms at his sides and his face composed and his mind moving at a velocity that looked, from the outside, like stillness. The lead medic looked up at him from across the room and said quietly, so the children couldn't hear, "This isn't collapse from exhaustion, sir. Her blood work will confirm. But the symptom pattern is consistent with Digitalis exposure," TJ said. The medic stopped. "You identified it. I've seen it before." He had. Once. In a room in Seoul. In a glass of water meant for someone else. He had been 26 years old, and he had arrived 2 minutes too late, and the knowledge of what that looked like, what it did to a body, and how it slowed the most essential rhythm in a person down to a dangerous whisper, had lived in him ever since like a scar that never fully flattened. "She's going to be fine," the medic said carefully, but whoever did this knew what they were doing. The dosage was calculated to look like a natural cardiac event. If she'd been alone, he stopped himself. She hadn't been alone, that was the thing. She had 3 3-year-olds who knew exactly what phone to call and exactly what to say and exactly how to stay calm while everything around them was falling apart. She had prepared them for this, specifically for this. TJ looked at the phone still clutched in Leo's small hands. The boy hadn't put it down. He was holding it the way his mother must have taught him to hold it, firmly, like a lifeline, like the most important object in the room. What did Regina know that had made her this afraid? And who had she been afraid of, really? That was the question TJ Jun carried with him as they lifted Regina onto a stretcher in the Triplets, without being told, without being asked, lined up beside her in height order, and walked out of the yellow house into the Syracuse cold, as though they had rehearsed this too, as though their mother had rehearsed everything. What he discovered next would change the entire shape of everything he thought he knew about why she had left. The VIP wing of the hospital had been cleared within 20 minutes of their arrival. Not because TJ Jun had made demands, he hadn't. He had simply made one phone call to the hospital's primary donor board, and the rest had arranged itself the way money arranges things when it is deployed with precision rather than noise. Quietly, completely. Without the kind of spectacle that draws attention to itself. Regina was in a private room. The Triplets were in the adjoining suite with 2 of TJ's staff, a woman named Yuna who had 3 children of her own and who had, within 4 minutes of meeting Leo, Leah, and Luna, somehow negotiated a truce based on the existence of a cartoon TJ had never heard of and the promise of dinosaur-shaped food. TJ sat in the chair beside Regina's bed and watched her breathe. That he was very good at watching things. Most people thought of observation as a passive act. They imagined that watching meant waiting, meant patience, meant the absence of action. TJ Jun had built an empire on the opposite truth. Watching was the most active thing he did. It was where everything began. But sitting still beside Regina was a different kind of exercise entirely. She had changed. Of course she had. 5 years did that to people. Softened some things, sharpened others. Wrote new information into the geography of a face. Her cheekbones sat a little higher, or maybe he had forgotten how high they sat. Her mouth was slightly drawn even in unconsciousness, the expression of a woman who had been solving problems in her sleep for years because the waking hours hadn't given her enough time to solve them all. She was beautiful, in a way that had nothing to do with arrangement. Or it was the kind of beauty that comes from a person occupying their own body with complete authority, from a woman who had decided, somewhere along the line, that she did not require external validation to take up space. Regina had always had that quality. It was the first thing he had noticed about her in Seoul, back when noticing her had still felt like a choice. It hadn't been a choice for very long. His phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. His father's number. He declined the call, set the phone face down on the bedside table, and returned his attention to Regina's face. 3 minutes later, the phone vibrated again. This time it was a text. TJ. What you're doing is theater. Come home. The assets can be processed quietly. Assets. His jaw tightened. He read the word twice, the way you press a bruise to confirm its depth. Then he turned the phone over again, screen down, and did not look at it. The medic's report had come back 40 minutes ago. The Digitalis toxicity, sublethal, carefully calibrated, designed to mimic a cardiac event in a person without a prior cardiac history. Whoever had done this was not improvising. They were executing a plan that had been thought through by someone who understood both pharmacology and plausible deniability. This wasn't random. This wasn't opportunistic. Someone had targeted Regina specifically and had done it in a way that would have left no trace if the children hadn't called. if TJ hadn't come. If she had simply been found hours later, when the narrative of a young single mother with an undisclosed condition was already available and waiting to be applied. The narrative had been prepared. That was what kept turning over in TJ's mind. The cover story existed before the event, which meant whoever had done this had known enough about Regina's life, her isolation, her independence, or her deliberate distance from any system that might have had a record of her, to design a disappearance that looked like her own body failing her. He was still working through the implications of that when the door opened. He did not look up immediately. He heard the sound, the specific rhythm of sneakers on hospital floor, small, quick, determined, and then a small body was at his elbow. Leah, the squared jaw, the level gaze, the absolute refusal to be unnoticed. Is she going to wake up? Leah asked. No preamble, no softening. Yes, TJ said. How do you know? Because I will not allow anything else. Leah considered this with the gravity of a much older person. She looked at her mother. She looked at TJ. She looked at the way his hand was resting on the bed rail, close to Regina's hand but not touching it, a proximity that was its own kind of statement. You're angry at her, Leah said. TJ looked at the child. Why do you think that? Because you look at her the way Leo looks at his breakfast when he wanted something different but he's not allowed to say it. Something moved through TJ Jun's chest that wasn't quite a laugh but was in the same family, and he pressed his mouth together and looked away from the child before she could register how precisely she had read him. He was angry. He was furious in the low, slow-burning way that was far more dangerous than the kind that flares and extinguishes. But he was furious at Regina for disappearing, furious at himself for not looking harder, furious at whoever had walked into the life she had built with such careful hands and tried to take it apart at the seams. But the fury was not the loudest thing in the room. The loudest thing in the room was Regina's breathing. Steady now, stronger than it had been at the house, the monitors registering a rhythm that was returning, incrementally, to something that could hold her. And the second loudest thing was the question TJ could not shake. Why did she have his number on a burner phone hidden in a velvet box, not in her regular contacts, not in her phone, in a separate device, encrypted, the kind of phone that required a specific satellite handshake to operate, locked in a box she had presumably told the children about and told them how to use? She had expected something, she had prepared for something, and she had prepared to call him, not the police. Not a family member, not a friend, him, the man she had erased, the man she had walked away from so completely that the first 18 months after she left, TJ had half believed she had never existed at all. The monitor beside her bed beeped once, a slight irregularity, immediately corrected, and TJ's hand moved before he thought about it. It moved across the bed rail and settled, lightly, at the edge of Regina's fingers. Not holding, not claiming, just present. A contact point. The way you place your hand on a wall in the dark to confirm the room still has edges. Her fingers were warm. That surprised him. He had expected cold. Her fingers were warm, and her chest was rising and falling with the steady, stubborn rhythm of a woman who had survived things she hadn't been designed to survive. And TJ Jun sat in a hospital chair in Syracuse, New York. And with the city's gray winter pressing against the window and his father's unanswered texts accumulating on a face-down phone. And he made a decision. He was not leaving without answers, and he was not leaving without her. What happened the next morning would change the architecture of his entire world, and she wouldn't even be awake to see it coming. She woke at 4:17 a.m., not gradually, not the slow, a cinematic return to consciousness that people describe when they have never actually been brought back from the edge of something. She woke the way she always woke, all at once, fully, eyes open before the rest of her body had caught up, already scanning the room for information before she remembered she needed to breathe. The ceiling was white, the light was low. There was the particular antiseptic warmth of a hospital room, and the sound of something monitoring her pulse. And she became aware of this in stages, the way you become aware of heat, a presence to her left. She turned her head. TJ Jun was asleep in the chair beside her bed. She had prepared for a lot of things. She had run scenarios in her mind for 5 years, not obsessively, not sentimentally, but practically, the way a woman who has survived on strategy prepares for variables. She had imagined receiving news of him, had imagined once or twice that the abstract possibility of a future confrontation, distant and controlled, with lawyers between them and documents deciding everything. She had not prepared for this. For him, asleep in a hospital chair in Syracuse, with his collar undone and his jaw unguarded and his hands loose in his lap, large, still hands that she remembered with a specificity that made her want to close her eyes again. She did not close her eyes. She looked at him the way she hadn't allowed herself to look at anything connected to him in 5 years, took inventory. He had changed the way cities change when significant money moves through them. The bones were the same, but everything built on top of them was harder, denser, more deliberate. The line of his jaw was sharper. The space between his brows held a crease that hadn't been there before. But he looked like a man who had spent 5 years making very large decisions and carrying every single one of them without putting any of them down. She knew that weight. She had carried her own version of it. His eyes opened, not slowly, instantly, the way she had woken, all at once, already tracking. They found her immediately, which told her he had known exactly where she was, even in sleep, had been oriented toward her, even unconscious. She catalogued that information and felt her pulse register it before she could decide not to feel anything. Neither of them spoke. The monitor between them marked the silence in steady beats. Then he said, "You were poisoned. Not how are you. Not thank God. Not any of the things that the moment might have called for if they had been different people or if this had been a different story." She said, "I know." That stopped him. She watched it stop him. Watched the slight recalibration in his expression, the way his eyes changed when information arrived that he hadn't anticipated. "You knew you were being poisoned, and you didn't. I didn't have enough proof yet." She pushed herself to sit up. Her body protested. She ignored it the way she'd gotten very good at ignoring her body when it had inconvenient things to say. "I needed documentation first. I needed something that would hold up outside of my word." "Your word against whose?" "Against your family's, TJ." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence, weighted, specific. TJ sat forward. "Tell me what you know." She looked at him for a long moment. This was the calculation she had run 1,000 times, not whether to tell him, but when and in what order, and whether the version of him that now existed was the version she had once believed he could become, or the version she had ultimately decided she couldn't risk waiting for. "Your board of directors," she said, "has been laundering acquisition capital through a network of upstate New York real estate holdings for 3 years. Shell companies, clean paperwork, plausible distance from the main entity. I stumbled onto it by accident. I was helping a non-profit I volunteer with navigate a property dispute, and the ownership chain didn't resolve the way it should have. I pulled the thread." She paused. The thread went all the way to Seoul. TJ was very still. "I started documenting. I was careful. I thought I was careful enough." She looked at her hands. "The neighbor, the one who brought me soup twice a week for 6 months, who babysat when I needed a meeting, who I considered—" She stopped. The word friend sat in her throat like something she no longer trusted. She was placed. "She had been there before I moved in, TJ. Your board anticipated where I might surface. They were watching for me." "How long?" "At least a year. And you didn't call me." "I was building a case. I needed it to be airtight before I trusted anyone with it, including you. That landed." He let it land. He did not flinch from it or argue with it. She registered that, and it registered as information, the way everything he did became data she was always compulsively processing. "Where is the documentation?" he asked. "Somewhere your board will never think to look." "Regina, I'm not telling you while I'm in a hospital bed with no leverage." The directness of it seemed to surprise him. She held his gaze steadily. "I built that case over 18 months. It's the only thing standing between me and being a very tidy loose end. I don't give it up until I have terms." Silence. Then TJ Jun did something she had not expected. He sat back. He looked at her with an expression she could not entirely read. Part calculation, part something older and less categorizable, and he said, "What are your terms?" She had prepared for resistance, for the particular variety of arrogance that had once made it so difficult to breathe in the same room as him. She had not prepared for this, for him asking. My children stay with me, she said. Always, unconditionally, agreed. I retain legal custody, independent of whatever your family argues. Agreed. I finish the case my way. With my contact at the FBI, you provide resources, not control. He was quiet for a moment. And what do I get? She looked at him. You get your name on the right side of a federal investigation before it becomes public. And you get the 3 people who called you man on the phone at 3 a.m. The monitor between them beeped, once, twice, regular, steady, holding. TJ Jun had spent his entire adult life in rooms where the power tilted toward whoever needed the other person least. He had built his reputation on being the one who needed nothing, who wanted nothing. Who could sit across any table in any city in the world and make the other party feel the weight of that indifference? He was sitting across from a woman in a hospital gown who had just negotiated with him while still recovering from attempted poisoning, and he was the one who felt the weight. He extended his hand. Terms accepted. She looked at his hand, looked at it with the careful appraisal of a woman who understood that some things, once touched, could not be put down again. She had known that about him once before. She had walked away from it because she had to, not because the pull had stopped. She shook his hand. His grip was firm, warm, brief. He let go before she had fully processed the contact, which told her everything about how carefully he was managing himself in this room. Good. She was managing herself just as carefully. What she didn't know yet, what she couldn't have known, like lying in that hospital bed in the gray Syracuse dawn, was that TJ Jun had already made a second set of decisions that went beyond terms, beyond cases and documentation and federal investigations. And those decisions were about to make someone in Seoul very, very afraid. It started with the lights. At 11:23 p.m. on the second night, the hospital's backup generators kicked in a half second after the main grid dropped. Bar in the transition was jagged enough to wake TJ from a sleep he had only partially surrendered to. His eyes were open before the emergency lighting finished cycling. His hand was already on his phone. 3 missed calls from Park, received within the last 4 minutes. He was moving before he finished reading. Park met him in the corridor with the expression of a man who had very bad information and was choosing how much of it to deliver in the next 10 seconds. The board didn't send a legal team, Park said quietly. They sent an extraction unit, 4 individuals. Hospital security credentials, forged, we think. They came in through the service entrance during the power window. Where are they now? 1 is confirmed on this floor. 3 are unaccounted for. TJ looked at the door to Regina's room, then at the door to the adjoining suite where his staff was with the triplets. His mind moved through the geometry of the problem the way it moved through every problem, rapidly, without sentiment, looking for the architecture underneath the emergency. Move the children first, he said. Service elevator. Don't use the main corridors. And Ms. James, I'll move her myself. TJ went back into Regina's room. She was already awake. Of course she was. She was sitting up in the bed with her IV arm extended in front of her, and her eyes moving through the same geometry his had. She was calculating exits, lines of sight, what she had available and what she didn't. She looked at him when he came in and said nothing, but her chin lifted slightly in the particular way he remembered. Tell me what I need to know, and I will handle my part. We need to move, he said. Now. She pulled the IV out herself. He watched her do it with steady hands and no hesitation, and felt something that was not quite admiration, because it was something older and more specific than admiration. He handed her the change of clothes Una had left in the room, and turned his back and moved to the door and listened to the corridor while she dressed. He was listening for footsteps. What he heard instead was her voice, low and controlled. Your board knew I was here before you did. Yes. Which means someone in your organization tracked the phone call. Yes. Which means whoever is coming doesn't know what I've already sent to my real FBI contact. They still think they can stop this. Can they? No. Complete. Absolute. Said, with the confidence of someone who has already moved the most important pieces to a position that cannot be recalled. I sent the first package 3 days ago. I was waiting to see what happened. He turned. She was dressed. Her natural hair was down. She hadn't had time to pin it, and it surrounded her face in full, dense coils that made her look like something ancient and unhurried, regardless of the hospital corridor and the emergency lighting and the situation pressing against all sides. She was barefoot. She looked at him with dark, level eyes. "I used you as bait," she said. "Flat, factual. I knew that calling you would accelerate their timeline. I needed them to move before they expected me to be ready." The sentence sat between them like a lit match. TJ Jun processed it with the cool, comprehensive attention of someone who had just been shown a move he hadn't anticipated from a player he had been underestimating. "You were never just hiding," he said. "No," she looked at him steadily. "I was hunting. I just needed time to finish." He held her gaze for one measured moment. In it, something transferred between them. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but the specific regard of two people who have just confirmed that the other one is capable of playing at their level. "Then let's make sure you get to finish," he said. They moved. The service corridors were dim and smelled of industrial cleaning fluid and old concrete, and Regina moved through them with a controlled urgency that matched TJ stride for stride, despite the bare feet and the residual unsteadiness of a body still recalibrating. They reached the service elevator. Inside, Yuna was already there with Leo, Leah, and Luna, the children in their red pajamas, wide awake and silent, with the particular seriousness of children who understand that being quiet right now is the most important thing they can do. Leo looked at his mother. His small face moved through relief and something that, in a grown man, would have been called barely contained fury. "We stayed," he said. The emphasis on stayed carrying everything. The waiting, the fear, the cost of following instructions when every instinct said otherwise. Regina pulled her son against her side with one arm, and her expression did something that TJ was not prepared for. It broke briefly, the way a very controlled person breaks when the presence of something they love finally dismantles the last of their composure. And then it reassembled, in the space of 2 seconds. Leo pulled back and looked at TJ. "You came," he said. "You actually came." The elevator moved. On the 3rd floor, the doors slid open to reveal a man in hospital security uniform who was not a hospital employee. TJ registered this in the same fraction of a second that he stepped in front of everyone else in the elevator. The man's hand moved. TJ moved faster. What followed was a contained technical exchange that lasted 11 seconds and ended with the man sitting on the corridor floor with a very clear understanding that he had made a significant miscalculation. TJ straightened his collar. His knuckles were slightly red. He did not look at Regina, but he heard her voice behind him, quiet and steady. "Elevator. Now." He turned. She was holding the elevator door. Leo had one arm around each of his sisters. Leah was watching TJ with those square jaw level eyes. Luna was holding her mother's hand. They moved. They reached the parking structure at B2 level and the convoy of vehicles that Park had repositioned within the last 8 minutes. And as the doors closed and the cars began to move through the pre-dawn dark of Syracuse, TJ felt the architecture of the situation shift beneath him the way tectonic things shift. Slowly, completely, with no possibility of return to the previous configuration. Regina sat across from him in the vehicle. The triplets were already asleep against each other, arranged in a row with the practiced efficiency of children who had been sharing space since before they could negotiate it. She was watching him, straight on. She had been watching him since the elevator, and he had been pretending not to know it. "You're not what I told them you were," she said quietly. "Man on the phone. What did you tell them I was?" She looked at the sleeping triplets, then back at him, big enough to scare the other monsters. "And now?" She was quiet for a moment, that particular quiet of hers that had always been its own kind of answer, that had always made him lean in when he should have leaned back. "Now," she said, "I think you might be something I didn't plan for." The car moved through the dark city. The triplets breathed in unison. Outside, Syracuse was beginning to gray at its edges. That first, tentative suggestion of morning that doesn't yet commit to light. TJ Jun looked at the woman across from him and understood with complete clarity that he was no longer playing the game he had arrived in the city to play. She had changed the rules. Again. And he was, against every calculation he had made for the last 34 years, willing to learn the new ones. What was waiting for them in Manhattan would test that willingness in ways neither of them had prepared for. The Manhattan penthouse was the kind of silence that cost something. Not quiet, silence. The specific engineered absence of the world that only extreme wealth can manufacture. 42 floors above the city, behind glass that filtered the light into something cooler and more controlled than natural light had any right to be. The three triplets slept in a room that was larger than Regina's entire Syracuse cottage, on beds so white they looked like clouds that had been folded into rectangles and told to stay. Regina stood in the doorway and watched them sleep and felt the particular vertigo of a woman who has built an entire philosophy on simplicity suddenly standing inside its opposite. She had told them once that kings lived in cold places. Leo had asked why. She had said because warmth costs something and kings never want to pay. She had been speaking about TJ Jun specifically, and she had hoped they were too young to remember, and now she was standing in his penthouse watching all three of them breathe inside the kingdom she had spent 5 years keeping them out of, and she understood that the past had better aim than she had given it credit for. She pulled the door closed. TJ was in the main room, jacket off, standing at the floor-to-ceiling window with a glass of water he hadn't drunk. His back was to her. The city spread behind the glass like a circuit board, every light a decision, every dark space a thing deliberately left unlit. He was built like a man who had been assembled for function rather than beauty, but function, done that precisely, became its own kind of beautiful. She had always known that about him. She had simply stopped letting herself think it. She crossed the room and stood beside him at the window, not close enough to touch, close enough that the air between them had a temperature. "Your father knows we're here," she said. "Yes. And you're not going to tell me how." "I don't have to. You already know." He looked at her from the side, the city light catching the angle of his face in a way that made him look like something carved rather than born. "You know exactly how he knew, Regina. You've known for longer than you've admitted." She held his gaze. "Say it then." "The FBI contact you used," he said, turning to face her fully. "His name is Marcus Webb. He's been on my father's payroll for 14 months. You didn't send a package to the bureau. You sent it directly to the man my father uses to intercept exactly this kind of information. The room did not change. The light didn't shift. The city went on being the city, indifferent and electric and enormous. But something moved through Regina, a cold lateral thing that started in her chest and moved outward, and her face did what her face rarely did. It showed the moment of impact. She had been betrayed, not by TJ, not by his board, by her own carefully built exit. "He's had it for how long?" she asked. 72 hours? She turned away from the window, took 3 steps into the room, stopped. She was running the numbers. He could see it, could see the way her mind moved behind her eyes. Rapid and systematic, the way a person does when they are recalculating from scratch without showing the work. Her natural hair was still down around her face, and she reached up and pulled it back and twisted it in a movement that was entirely unconscious and entirely her. That specific gesture she made when she needed her physical field clear so her mind could operate without obstruction. He had forgotten that gesture, or he had told himself he had. "He doesn't have the original," she said. Her voice was even. She had already found something. "Webb got a decoy. I built 2 versions of the documentation, one with a traceable signature designed to surface in exactly the kind of audit the board would run if they intercepted it, accurate enough to feel real, corrupted enough in 3 specific places to be inadmissible." TJ was still. "The original," she continued, "is with someone your father has never had access to, has never heard of, and will not be able to find in time." She looked at him. "I told you the case was being built my way." He looked at her for a long moment. In the particular silence that followed, something shifted between them. The weight distribution of the room changed, the way a scale changes when you remove something from one side and add it to the other. He had arrived in Syracuse believing he was rescuing her. He understood now, with complete and somewhat humbling clarity, that the timeline of her operation had never included rescue as a variable. He was not the cavalry. He was a piece she had moved into position, and he was not angry about it. That was what surprised him. "Who has it?" he asked. "Someone who will only release it to me. In person. On my timeline." She met his eyes steadily. "Which means I need to still be standing when that timeline arrives, which is why I called you." He walked toward her. Not fast. He never moved fast when the intention was weight rather than speed. He stopped close enough that she had to choose to hold her ground, and she did, chin level, eyes direct, the gold undertones of her dark skin catching the warm interior light in a way that made her look for just a moment like something illuminated from inside. "You used me," he said, low. Without accusation, which was almost worse than accusation. I needed someone the board would respond to. She didn't look away. Someone whose presence would force their hand before they were ready. You were the only person on the planet who qualified. Because of the children. Because of who you are. A pause, fractional, almost imperceptible. The children are why I kept the number, but you are why it worked. The space between them was doing something that neither of them was naming. It had a pressure, like weather. It was like the particular atmospheric change before something decisive happens, and the air knows it before the people do. He reached out and adjusted the twist of her hair, a single, deliberate contact, his fingers grazing the back of her neck for 1 second before he stepped back. Not a claim, not a question. Something more precise than either. A reminder of what his hands remembered even when the rest of him was trying to make decisions. She felt it move through her in waves she refused to show. "I need access to your secure server," she said. Her voice was the same. She was very good. "I know," he said. He was already moving to the desk. What neither of them said, what sat in the room between the window and the desk and the sleeping children and the weight of 5 years of deliberate distance, was that the calculation had changed. That the board and the documentation and the FBI and Marcus Webb were all still real and all still urgent, and none of them were the most dangerous thing currently in this room. The most dangerous thing in this room was that neither of them had moved to put more space between them. What she found on that server would break something open, not in the investigation, in her. And it would confirm the one thing she had spent 5 years refusing to believe about TJ Jun. He had known where she was, not for 5 years, not for 3, but for long enough that the question of why he hadn't come would demand an answer she wasn't sure she was ready for. She found the file at 2:09 a.m. It was not hidden, or rather, it was hidden the way things are hidden by people who have access to very sophisticated concealment and choose, for reasons of their own, to use only moderate concealment, as though some part of them wants the right person to find it. She was in the study. The rest of the penthouse was quiet. TJ had gone to take a call in the far room, his voice occasionally audible through the door as a low, controlled frequency that told her the call was significant and the person on the other end was being managed rather than conversed with. The triplets were still sleeping. She was on his server, navigating through the directory structure with the focused, methodical attention of someone who has learned to read information architecture the way other people read faces. The file was labeled with a date, a Syracuse date, 14 months ago. She opened it. It was a surveillance log, not aggressive, not the kind that comes from an intent to harm or control, the kind that comes from someone who has deployed a quiet resource at a careful distance and instructed that resource to observe and report and do nothing. There were photographs, her street, her cottage with its yellow paint, the triplets in the garden, small, bright figures against a gray upstate sky, their matching dark curls catching the light. Her, in the front garden, kneeling in the dirt with her hands in the soil, her braids pinned up and her face turned slightly toward the sky the way she does when she is deciding something. He had known, not everything, not the documentation, not the plan, but her. He had known where she was. Ood had been watching over her from a distance that maintained her ignorance of him and had told no one. Not his father. Not his board. The file had an annotation at the bottom in TJ's own access log, dated 13 months ago. Do not engage. Keep only. She is safe. That's enough. She sat with that sentence for a long time. He could have come. He had known where she was, and he had chosen, 13 months ago, not to come. When he had watched her be safe, and decided that her choosing to be without him was something he had no right to override, and he had swallowed that decision whole and said nothing and kept watching from a distance and called that enough about a version of enough that clearly wasn't. She heard the door of the study open. She did not look up. TJ came into the room and saw immediately that she had been in the directory. She had not tried to hide it. He stopped in the middle of the room. Said nothing. "You knew," she said. Not accusation, not even hurt exactly. Something more complicated. The voice of a woman whose entire strategic framework has just had a key variable re-entered. Yes. How long? 14 months ago, my system flagged a property search in Syracuse, matching a behavioral pattern I had set an alert for. A specific combination of choices, neighborhood, payment structure, radius from a public park. The kind of choices a particular person would make. He paused. "You make choices with a signature, Regina. You always have." She finally looked at him. "And you just watched." "You left," he said simply. "You made a choice. I wasn't willing to unmake it for you." The room was very quiet. "That's the most infuriating thing you have ever said to me," she said. "And you have said some genuinely infuriating things." Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile, the ghost of one, the structural implication of one without the full commitment. "I know. You were watching me be in danger for months, and you weren't in danger for the full 14 months. The poisoning started 6 months ago. When I flagged the change in the surveillance pattern, I accelerated the alert system." He held her gaze. 3 weeks ago, my system picked up a pharmaceutical purchase in your zip code consistent with a Digitalis derivative. I was already planning to come." She stared at him. "You were already planning to come. Nah, and then the phone rang and you beat me to it." The not smile again. Controlled. Almost wry. "You are always 6 steps ahead of where I think you are." Regina looked at the screen, at the photograph of herself in the garden with her hands in the soil and her face turned toward the sky. She looked at it for a long time. "The children," she said, "in those photographs. Did you?" "Yes." One word. And in it, the weight of 14 months of a man looking at images of 3 children who looked like him and choosing, over and over, not to arrive uninvited into a life that had decided to be built without him. She stood. She crossed the room, and TJ held still the way he held still when something important was happening that he could not control. And she stopped in front of him close enough that she could see the specific tension in the muscles along his jaw, the controlled holding of a man who has run out of calculated moves and is now operating on something older than strategy. She put one hand flat against his chest, not gentle, not romantic, deliberate, the way you put your hand on something to confirm it is real. His heart was very loud. "You should have come," she said. "I know." His voice was lower than she remembered it being capable of getting. "I know, Regina. I needed you to come." She said it the way people say the most honest thing, quickly before the mind can object, not to fix anything, not to take over. "I just needed. I know." He put his hand over hers, held it there against his chest, against the loud, inconvenient, completely unstrategic truth of what his body was doing in this room with her this close. "I know what you needed. And I made a decision I thought was right, and I was wrong. And I'm here now." She looked up at him. He looked down at her. The air between them was no longer just temperature. It was every unanswered conversation, every erased contact. Every night she had not let herself think about him. Every morning he had looked at a surveillance photograph and told himself that her being safe was enough when it had never, not for a single day, been enough. It was 5 years compressed into a room, into the distance between a hand on a chest and a decision neither of them was quite making yet. She didn't step back. He didn't move forward. They stood in the suspended gravity of 2 people who have been here before, in this exact space between restraint and ruin, and know exactly what it costs to cross it. Then she said very quietly, "When this is over, TJ." His jaw tightened. He understood what she meant. Not yet. Not while everything was still burning. Not while the case was open, and his father was circling, and the children were asleep in the next room, and the ground between them was still too freshly turned to hold the weight of what they were not yet saying. "When this is over," he agreed. His voice was low enough that it felt like a secret. He let go of her hand, slowly, the way you set down something fragile. He stepped back. He picked up his phone from the desk. He walked to the door. At the threshold, he stopped. Without turning, "I didn't come because you chose to leave, but I never stopped choosing you." He left the room. She stood alone in the study, her hand still warm where his had been, the city burning 42 floors below her, and she pressed her eyes closed and breathed and breathed and breathed. The call that had been coming arrived the following morning, not from TJ's father's number, from a concierge desk in the hotel 2 blocks away. A message delivered through the kind of intermediary that powerful men use when they want a conversation to have no record. The senior chairman of Jun Global had arrived in New York and was requesting a meeting with Regina James, not with TJ, with her. She knew in the way she had always known things that other people discovered too late that this was not a request. It was a move. And she knew, with equal certainty, exactly what her countermove was going to be. She called TJ, told him. His response was a silence so complete she could feel its temperature through the phone. Then he said, "He doesn't get to be in the same room as you." She said, "He already thinks he's in control of this meeting. Let him keep thinking that." Another silence. Shorter. The kind that means someone is updating their assessment. "You want to use him," TJ said. She said, "I want him to use himself." There's a difference. They met the senior chairman at a private dining room in a Manhattan hotel, the kind of room that has no windows and very thick walls, and a staff trained to see nothing and document less. TJ's father arrived precisely on time because men like him understood that lateness was theater and precision was dominance. He was compact and silver-haired and wore his authority the way a person wears skin, not as something applied, but as something intrinsic. That he looked at Regina the way men of his generation and his world looked at women who had complicated their plans, not with hatred, but with the particular cold appraisal of someone deciding how much something is worth. He did not look at TJ when he entered. He looked at TJ when he sat down, and what passed between father and son was not a greeting. It was a reconnaissance. Regina poured the tea herself, set a cup in front of each of them, sat down and folded her hands on the table with the serene composure of a woman who has decided that this room belongs to her, regardless of whose name is on the reservation. The senior chairman looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, in English that carried no accent, because he had spent 40 years making sure it didn't, "You are very composed for someone in your position." She said, "And what position is that?" "A woman," he said. "Fee who is sitting between my son and everything he is about to lose." TJ moved. Regina put one hand on the table, not touching him, but visible to him, the gesture a restraint and a communication simultaneously. "Stay, I have this." The senior chairman watched the exchange with sharp eyes, and something shifted in his expression, something that might have been, in a man with more flexibility, surprise. "With respect," Regina said, "your timeline is already over. The documentation your associate Marcus Webb retrieved is a decoy. The original has been in federal hands since yesterday morning." She paused. "I imagine your Seoul office is having a complicated day." The senior chairman's stillness was the particular stillness of a man who has just heard something he did not have time to disbelieve. She continued, "The 6 board members who will be named in the first filing know who sent the poisoned food through my neighbor. Thus they will say so when it benefits them to say so, and it will benefit them very shortly." She looked at him with eyes that held nothing he could use, no fear, no anger, no negotiable emotion of any kind. "The neighbor," she added, "is currently speaking with investigators in a federal building 12 blocks from here. She has been speaking with them since 6 this morning." The senior chairman looked at TJ for the first time since sitting down. And TJ was watching his father with an expression that was not anger and was not satisfaction. It was something more final than either. It was the expression of a man who has spent his entire life inside a structure and has just chosen to walk out of it. "This is what you chose," the senior chairman said. His voice was quiet. "Over your name, over what I built." TJ said, "You built it on the wrong things. I'm building something that holds." The senior chairman stood, He was still composed. Men like him did not unravel in hotel dining rooms. They simply became colder, more economical, more remote. He looked at Regina one final time. She returned the look with the steady attention of a woman who has already won and is simply waiting for the other party to understand it. Whatever he was looking for in her face, he did not find it. He left without another word. The door closed behind him with the quiet, definitive sound of something ending. TJ exhaled. It was a long exhale, the kind that carries years inside it. Regina poured more tea, set a fresh cup in front of him. He looked at it, then at her. She was sitting with one shoulder slightly turned toward him, her braids pinned up and her jaw set and her eyes already moving forward to the next thing. Because that was what she did. She was always already at the next thing, always 3 moves ahead, always carrying the weight of her own intelligence with a steadiness that made him feel, not in the truest sense of the word, met. He had faced presidents. He had negotiated with men who had the authority to end careers and the disposition to enjoy it. He had sat in rooms where the air itself was hostile and held himself together through sheer architecture of will. He had never felt as precisely seen as he felt when Regina James was simply sitting across a table from him, thinking. "You knew she had been speaking with investigators since 6 this morning," he said. "How did you arrange that before this meeting?" "Yes. You let him make his move so you could document it." She looked at him. "I needed him in a room. I needed him to threaten me in front of a witness." She tilted her chin toward the barely visible lens of the room's security system, which she had noted within 30 seconds of entering, and which TJ now understood she had confirmed was recording before she had sat down. "Everything he said in this room is on record now." TJ Jun looked at the woman across the table from him and felt something so uncomplicated and so enormous that he had no framework to contain it. Not desire, though that was present, and had been present since she had walked into the room in a burgundy coat with her braids up and her face composed. Not gratitude, though that was there too, deep and genuine and humbling, something more than both. The specific feeling of standing beside the right person at exactly the right time, which is a feeling most people search for their entire lives and many never locate. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She looked at him. Then, slowly, she turned her hand over and let his fingers close around hers. "When this is over," he said quietly. She looked at him for a long moment. The city moved somewhere beyond the windowless walls, somewhere in a federal building 12 blocks away. A woman was saying things into a recorder that would dismantle a structure built on the assumption that some people could be made to disappear quietly. She said, "Almost over." And for the first time in 5 years, she smiled at him. Not the composed, controlled expression she deployed as armor. A real smile, quick, warm, tucking itself away almost before it arrived, the kind that belongs to the private version of a person rather than the version they show the world. He kept hold of her hand. The press conference was not in the agenda. It was not in any agenda, not the one his PR team had built, not the one his board had been circulating, not the emergency protocol his father's legal counsel had faxed to 3 different offices in the previous 6 hours in a desperate attempt to contain what they correctly sensed was coming without being able to see its shape clearly enough to stop it. The shape of it was this. TJ Jun, at 10:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in Manhattan, she walked onto a stage that had been set for a merger announcement, and he was not alone. He was holding Luna. Luna, in a white dress that Una had found somewhere in the previous 2 hours, with her enormous dark eyes and her father's photographic focus, and her mother's particular quality of stillness, the kind of stillness that looks like peace, but is actually attention, complete and uninterruptible. She had one small hand curled around TJ's lapel. She was not scared. She was watching the room with the calm assessment of a child who has been taught that watching is the most important thing you can do before you decide what to say. Leo and Leah walked in on TJ's left, side by side, matched in small bespoke dark blazers. Leo's jaw was set. Leah's chin was up. They looked like him. Anyone in that room who had ever seen a photograph of TJ Jun at age 4 felt the recognition hit them before their minds had finished processing what they were seeing. The room went quiet in stages. First the front rows, then the middle, then the back, as the quiet moved through the space like water finding its level. TJ stepped to the microphone. Luna patted his lapel once decisively, as if confirming he was ready. "My name is TJ Jun," he said. "Most of you know what you expected me to say today. I'm going to say something different." He looked directly into the nearest camera, not at the room, at the lens, at the broadcast, at the thing that could not be taken back once it was in it. "These are my children, Leo, Leah, and Luna June." He paused. "Let the name settle. Let the implication of the name, the public, legal, recorded implication of it, become real in real time, on camera, in front of 200 witnesses and every feed that was broadcasting this live. They have existed for 3 years and 4 months. I have known them for 4 days. That gap is not their mother's failing. It is the consequence of a system designed to make certain people disappear when they become inconvenient." The room had a new kind of silence now, the kind that happens when people realize they are present at something that will be discussed for a long time. Their mother is Regina James. You will be hearing a great deal about her in the coming days, specifically in relation to a federal investigation into Jun Global's acquisition subsidiary that she has been building, at significant personal risk, for 18 months. He looked at the camera again. She built it alone. She built it while raising 3 children, and she built it better than any team I have ever paid to do anything. In the green room behind the stage, Regina stood with Park and watched the monitor. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress, fitted at the shoulders, full at the hem, the color of something decided rather than chosen. Her braids were up. Her face was composed in the specific way of a woman who is feeling a great deal and has decided that this moment belongs to her children, not to her feelings. She watched TJ place Luna carefully into Leah's arms and reach into his jacket pocket. She did not know what he was about to do. She had not been told. He produced a document, held it up, not theatrically, not with the performance of a man who practices his moments, but with the flat directness of someone making a record. "This is a transfer instrument for 51% of my personal holdings in Jun Global. It is being transferred today into an independently administered trust. The trust's primary beneficiary is the long-term financial security of 3 people who had no say in the world they were born into." He folded it once, put it back in his pocket. "The board of directors of Jun Global is welcome to contest this. They should be aware that any legal challenge they initiate will be filed in a jurisdiction where a federal investigation is already open. I recommend they consider that context carefully." In the green room, Regina put one hand over her mouth, not because she was crying, because she was not going to cry in front of Park, and the pressure of not doing so required physical assistance. He hadn't told her. He had made this decision, this enormous, irreversible, structurally devastating decision, without consulting her, without framing it as something she owed him gratitude for, without making it a negotiation. He had simply done it and put it on camera where it could never be undone. She thought about the annotation in the file. She is safe. That is enough. She thought about a man who had spent 14 months watching her be safe from a distance and calling that enough because she had not asked for more. She thought about what it meant that when he finally stopped waiting for an invitation, the first thing he did was put his body between her children and everything that wanted to harm them, and the second thing he did was give away half of everything he owned in front of 200 people and 2 live feeds. She was going to have a great deal to say to him about making unilateral decisions. Later. She was going to say all of it later, right now, on the monitor. Leo was standing at TJ's side with his square jaw and his watchful eyes, and he looked, for the first time in the 4 days since this had all begun, like a child rather than a small soldier, and that undid her more completely than anything else had. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she recognized as her true FBI contact, the one she had told no one about, the one who had been waiting on her timeline. The text said, "Watching the feed, beautiful play, ready when you are, say the word." She texted back one word, now. What happened in the next 48 hours would dismantle Jun Global's shadow operations from the inside, surface the names of 6 board members in a federal filing, and result in the senior chairman of Jun Global being escorted from his Seoul office building by investigators on 2 continents simultaneously. The neighbor who had delivered soup and taken photographs and administered carefully calibrated doses of something designed to look like natural failure, was named in 3 separate statements. Her real name was not the one she had given Regina. Her real employer was not the company she had claimed. Every layer of the fiction she had constructed across 6 months of careful proximity was unwrapped in federal documentation with a precision that mirrored, exactly, the precision with which Regina had spent 18 months constructing the case that unwrapped it. The neighbor had believed she was invisible. She had not accounted for the possibility that the woman she was watching back. But that was the part that happened in the news cycle, in the legal record, in the documented architecture of consequence. The part that mattered happened in a green room in Manhattan, where a woman in a burgundy dress turned away from a monitor. I pressed her back against a wall, looked at the ceiling, and breathed. She had been holding that breath for 5 years. She let it go. 6 months is not a long time to rebuild a life. It is, however, exactly enough time to determine whether the rebuilt version has better bones than the original. The garden was going. The triplets had decided, with the collaborative authority that only 3 people who have operated as a unified entity since before they could walk fully possess, that they wanted tomatoes, sunflowers, and something Leo had seen in a documentary that turned out to be a variety of Korean perennial herb that TJ had to have shipped from a specialty nursery in Queens. The herb was thriving. It had no business thriving in a Syracuse garden in the first sustained warmth of late spring, and yet it was, with the particular stubbornness of things planted by people who have survived long odds. Regina was on her knees in the soil when she heard TJ's car. She knew the sound of it now. She had not meant to learn it, had not sat down and decided that this was information she would absorb. But the body learns things the mind doesn't authorize. And over the last 4 months of TJ's careful, deliberate presence in Syracuse, her body had learned his car, his step on the porch, the specific cadence of his voice when he was on a call that required performance versus a call that required honesty. She also knew that he had given the CEO title to a board-approved successor and taken a remote chairman role. She had not asked him to do that. He had told her the way he told her most significant things, as settled fact, not proposal. She was learning to find it less infuriating and more its own kind of language. The language of a man who was raised to lead and is teaching himself, at 34, to stay. She stood, brushed her hands on her jeans. He watched him come around the side of the house, because he always came around the side, never the front, and she had never asked why, but she understood it was because the front door of this house belonged to the life she had built alone, and he was choosing not to claim that entrance. He was in a light gray shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He was not trying to look casual. He was simply in the particular way he had always been, exactly as much as he was and nothing else. He stopped a few feet from her. In his hand was a bouquet of yellow flowers, not roses, sunflowers, fresh ones, the kind you get from a market on the corner rather than a florist. She registered the distinction immediately and felt something move in her chest that had no clean name. "The tomatoes are coming up," he said. "Finally," she said. "Leo has been checking them every 2 hours. I know. He sent me a progress report." She looked at him. "He texts you progress reports. Daily." When something warm and slightly undone moved through TJ's expression, the expression he had developed in the last 4 months that she thought of as his Syracuse face, distinct from every other face she had ever seen him make. Unguarded in specific places, still controlled in others, a work in progress. Luna also sent me a drawing of a tomato. It looked more like a planet, but I told her it was an excellent tomato. Regina took the sunflowers, held them, but looked at them in the way she looked at things that required her to decide what she felt before she responded. "We got the final filing confirmation this morning," she said. "Webb has been charged. The 6 board members are cooperating." "I know. My lawyers called at 6 a.m. He looked at her. "How do you feel?" "Tired," she said. "Honest, relieved, tired of being relieved." She looked up. "Like I can finally hear the house without something underneath the quiet." He nodded. He understood what she meant. She could see that he understood it, and she could also see that he had his own version of it, his own quiet that had now stopped having something underneath it. And they looked at each other across the particular knowledge of 2 people who have survived the same storm from different positions. "I want to show you something," he said. He reached into his pocket and produced the phone, the satellite phone, the black encrypted, a velvet box phone that had started everything, the one that had been silent for 1,825 days and then screamed back to life at 3:07 a.m. and changed the architecture of 2 lives and 3 small ones simultaneously. She looked at it. "I thought you left that in Manhattan. I came back for it." He held it in his palm, face up, between them. "I've been thinking about what it means that you kept it, not as a romantic gesture. I know you. I know it wasn't that." He looked at the phone, then at her. "You kept it as the last line, the final option, the thing you reached for only when every other wall had come down. Which means that at the end of every contingency you ever planned, when you imagined the worst possible version of what could happen, I was still the answer." She said nothing. She could not immediately find language for what was happening in her chest. "I'm not saying that to claim anything," he continued. "I'm saying it because I spent 5 years being the wrong version of who I needed to be for you. And I spent 14 months watching you be safe from a distance and telling myself that was enough. And I don't want to do either of those things anymore." He looked at her steadily. "I want to be the answer you reach for when nothing has gone wrong yet, not just the last option." The garden was very still around them. The air smelled of soil and something green and growing and the faint sweetness of the sunflowers between her hands. Somewhere inside the house, Leah's voice and Leo's voice were in negotiation about something, and Luna's voice was providing periodic commentary with the unflappable authority of a child who considers herself the decisive vote. Regina looked at the phone in his hand. She thought about the velvet box, about the 5 years of carrying it from city to city, apartment to apartment, house to house, never activated, never disposed of. She thought about the weight of it and the reason for the weight and the particular kind of grief that comes from keeping something you're not sure you'll ever be ready to use. She thought about 3:07 a.m. and 3 children in red pajamas holding a phone between their small hands and the way the line had opened to the sound of breathing. She reached out and took the phone from his palm. He let her take it. He watched her look at it. He did not try to manage what her face was doing. She looked at it for a long time. Long enough that the light in the garden shifted slightly, the afternoon moving almost imperceptibly toward evening, the garden going golden at its edges in the unhurried way of late spring. Then she held it out to him. "Let's walk," she said. He took it. He walked beside her through the garden, past the tomatoes and the sunflowers and Leo's Korean herb that had no business thriving and was thriving anyway. Would out through the low gate at the back of the property, down the 2 blocks to where the Erie Canal caught the afternoon light and held it, gold and wavering, on its slow surface. They stood at the edge. The water moved without urgency. The city went about its business at a respectful distance. TJ looked at her. "You're sure?" "I never needed a ghost line," she said. "I needed you to decide to be real." She looked at the water, then at him, at the man who had answered at 3:07 a.m., who had kicked in a yellow door, who had sat in a hospital chair in the dark with his hand at the edge of her fingers, who had walked onto a stage holding their daughter and given away half of everything to say these people are mine and I am choosing them, who had sat across from his father in a windowless room and watched the old world lose because she had already replaced it with something sturdier. "You decided." He turned the phone in his hand once, then, without ceremony, without performance, he tossed it into the Erie Canal. It hit the water and sank immediately. No drama, no linger. The canal accepted it the way it accepted everything, without comment, without distinction, as simply another thing that had served its purpose and was now released. The surface closed over it. Beside him, Regina exhaled. And it was the exhale of 5 years, of Syracuse and Seoul and velvet boxes and satellite frequencies, and the particular, an exhausting weight of loving someone from a distance while pretending you have moved on. TJ Jun reached for her hand. She let him take it. His grip was warm and immediate and real, and she laced her fingers through his with the quiet, unhurried certainty of a woman who has made a decision and does not intend to revisit it. Behind them, 2 blocks away, 3 children were in a garden. Leo was checking tomatoes. Leah was winning whatever argument they had been having. Luna was watching a bee with the complete attention of a child who finds the world, in spite of everything, endlessly worth watching. The canal moved. The light held. The story that had started with a woman hitting the floor of her kitchen and 3 children reaching for a forbidden drawer and a phone that should have been dead, finding its way back to the one voice it was built to reach. That story was arriving, finally, at something that needed no emergency to sustain it. Just this. Just the water and the light and 2 hands that had found each other in the ruin and decided, against all reasonable calculation, to stay. And that is where we leave them. If this story took something from you, if you felt it somewhere real, then you already know why we tell it. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching from. I want to know if you are holding your breath in Atlanta, completely undone in London, or somewhere in Lagos, done with TJ Jun's entire emotional journey and ready to start over from the beginning. Drop your city, drop your team. And if you want a part 2, because there are stories inside this story we have not touched yet, things about what Luna figures out when she is old enough to read her mother's case files, about what happens when the world finds out who Regina really was before Syracuse, about what TJ Jun looks like when he is genuinely, completely, undeniably at peace for the first time in his life. Comment part 2. Right now, so I know you are ready, subscribe, hit the bell. Share this with someone who needs a story that does not flinch. The best ones never do.